Story 1: The Midnight Drive. It was New Year's Eve in 2017, and I was headed home from a semester at the University of Rochester. As I made my way to the airport, I was already in a foul mood. The Cleveland Browns had just completed an abysmal 0-16 season, and my flight had been delayed. To top it off, my family's New Year's plans were thrown off course, so I was left alone to drive in a barely working spare car. My mom, hoping to cheer me up, sent along our dog Vera for company. The drive was uneventful at first, just long stretches of Ohio back roads covered in a light dusting of snow. It was dark, so dark that only the occasional porch light from a farmhouse pierced the black void. Suddenly Vera started whining and pacing in the passenger seat. Then she bolted out of the car before I could even react, charging straight into the woods. I shouted for her to come back, but she didn't. My heart was racing as I followed her into the trees, flashlight trembling in my hand. The only light was the faint glow of snow underfoot. I ran blindly, panic surging in my chest. What was she chasing? What was out there? The woods were silent, eerie, save for the deafening sound of branches crashing as something, or someone, moved around us. After what felt like hours, I found Vera crouched, trembling, and terrified. She wouldn't stop shaking, tail tucked between her legs. Something had scared her, and it wasn't just the cold. I turned to head back to the car, but the sounds of crashing grew louder. Whatever it was following us. My heart pounded as I ran, praying that we'd make it back before whatever was lurking behind us reached us. We finally made it to the car, and as I slammed the door shut, I glanced back at the woods. 3 figures were standing there, watching us. I don't know how I managed to drive away, but I did, only to find that Vera had been stabbed. The sight of her blood made me panic all over again. And that's when I realized the terror wasn't over. I had no idea what had happened out there, but I would never forget that night. Story 2: The Snowplow Driver. It was a few years ago, on New Year's Eve, that I found myself driving to my parents' house in upstate Pennsylvania. I had left in the late afternoon, expecting a simple drive, but the weather had different plans. A light snow turned into a blizzard, and soon enough, my sedan was sliding all over the road. I had to pull over, stuck in the middle of nowhere, with no way to keep moving. I texted my parents, letting them know the situation, and they were understandably worried. I sat there for over an hour, the snow piling up around me, and realized I wasn't going anywhere that night. Then, I saw the headlights of a snowplow cutting through the storm. Relief flooded through me. I rolled down the window, and an older man, gruff and weathered, asked if I was okay. His voice was rough, like he'd spent years out in the cold. I felt an odd unease, but the storm was getting worse and I had no choice but to trust him. He offered to give me a ride and I agreed, but something didn't feel right. As soon as I got into his snowplow, I noticed that we were driving in the wrong direction. My GPS kept recalculating. I tried to stay calm but felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't right. Then I saw the signs. Empty liquor bottles on the floor, torn up maps shoved in the side pockets, and a knife wedged between the seats. My stomach twisted. Something was horribly off. We were no longer on the right road, and I knew this wasn't a detour. The man wasn't taking me where I needed to go. I glanced out the window and saw a house in the distance, a potential lifeline. Without thinking, I yanked the door open and jumped out. The snow hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back. The man shouted something, but I didn't hear it. I didn't dare look. I pounded on the door of the house, screaming for help. A man and woman let me inside, and they immediately called the police. By the time the police arrived, the snowplow driver was long gone. The authorities couldn't find him in the storm, and I never saw him again. But I'll never forget the fear I felt, knowing I was so close to a nightmare. Story 3: The Ice Fishing Trap. Every New Year's Eve, I kept up the tradition my dad started, ice fishing with my 2 best friends, Nate and Trevor. We loaded up Nate's truck with gear and headed out to a secluded lake in northwestern Ontario. It wasn't a popular spot, which was exactly what we loved about it: the peace, the quiet, the wilderness. As we parked near the trailhead, I noticed a man standing in the snow, staring at our truck. His posture was odd, rigid. He glanced at his phone, then back at us, as though he was waiting for something. Something about it felt off. I muttered to Nate and Trevor, but they didn't think much of it. But then the man rushed toward us, frantic, claiming his friend had fallen through the ice and was in danger. He begged us to follow him, to help. We ran after him, not thinking twice. But as we got closer to the lake, something didn't feel right. The ice wasn't thick here. It was a remote part of the shoreline, far from where anyone would normally fish. Before I could stop myself, I saw 2 more men standing there. They weren't carrying fishing gear. They weren't moving. They were just waiting, watching us. One of them raised a gun and pointed it directly at me. My heart stopped. I froze, terrified. The man we'd been following turned around, a sinister smirk on his face. We'd been set up. They demanded everything we had, our wallets, our phones, Nate's truck keys. We handed it all over, knowing there was nothing else we could do. But then, just when we thought it was over, Nate pulled out his phone. He had lied, telling them it was in the car, but in reality, it was hidden. He called the police, and soon enough the authorities were on their way. But by the time they arrived, the thieves were long gone, and Nate's car was nowhere to be found. We never saw those men again, and to this day I still wonder, who were they? What did they want with us? It's a question that haunts me every year as I think back to that New Year's Eve, when we narrowly escaped a deadly trap.